The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of forward operating base Meridian like a blade through silk. General Marcus Whitfield stood motionless in the command center, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the tactical display table until his knuckles went white. The green glow of radar screens painted shadows across his face as he stared at something that shouldn't exist. A lone aircraft signature, moving against impossible odds through hostile airspace that had been declared a no-fly zone 12 hours earlier. "Sir, we're getting an intermittent transponder signal," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of cooling fans and distant generator engines. It's one of ours." The general's jaw tightened. Every aircraft in the theater had been accounted for. Every pilot either confirmed safe at base or otherwise. The mathematics of war were brutal and precise, and they left no room for ghosts in the sky. Yet there it was on the screen, a single blip moving with the characteristic flight pattern of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign unknown, flying a search pattern over grid square Tango 74. 3 companies of Marines were trapped in that grid square, cut off, surrounded, and running low on ammunition after 18 hours of continuous contact with enemy forces. The rescue helicopters couldn't penetrate the dense surface-to-air missile coverage. Fast movers had been turned back by weather that had rolled in like a living thing, thick with electrical storms that made precision strikes impossible. Every tactical option had been exhausted, every angle analyzed and found wanting. Whitfield had made the call 20 minutes ago, the hardest call of his 30-year career: stand down all rescue operations. The boys on the ground were on their own. "Get me a positive identification on that aircraft," he commanded, his voice steady despite the churning in his gut. "And somebody wake up Colonel Harris. Tell him we might have a rogue bird in play." The communications officer, a young lieutenant whose hands trembled slightly as she worked her console, looked up with confusion written across her features. "Sir, according to flight operations, all A-10s are accounted for. Maintenance logs show." "I don't care what the logs show," Whitfield cut her off. "I care about what's flying out there right now, in whether that would ground an Angel heading straight for the hornet's nest we just wrote off as unsalvageable." Outside the command bunker, the first pale hints of dawn were struggling against a sky heavy with storm clouds. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the mountains that ringed their position like sleeping giants. Somewhere beyond those peaks, Marines were fighting for their lives, believing they had been forgotten. But someone hadn't forgotten. Someone was still flying. The radio hissed, then cleared. A voice emerged from the static, calm, professional, with just the slightest hint of something that might have been determination, or perhaps defiance. "Meridian Base, this is Reaper 77. I'm inbound to Grid Tango 74. Request immediate tactical update and friendly positions." Silence fell over the command center like a heavy blanket. Every head turned toward the speakers. The voice was unmistakably female, young but confident, with the crisp diction of a pilot trained in the brutal precision of close air support. But according to every record they had, every roster and every flight plan, Reaper 77 didn't exist. General Whitfield reached for the radio handset with fingers that had signed too many death certificates, had delivered too many folded flags to weeping families. His voice, when it came, carried the weight of command and the bitter edge of a man who had just been asked to believe in miracles. "Reaper 77, this is Meridian Base Actual. Identify yourself immediately. You are flying in denied airspace without authorization. RTB immediately." The response came back without hesitation, cutting through the static with the clarity of absolute conviction. "Negative, Meridian Base. Marines are still breathing down there. Reaper 77 is going to work." The general stared at the radio as if it had personally betrayed him. In the corner of the command center, a young intelligence analyst named Captain Morrison pulled up aircraft assignments on his terminal, his fingers dancing across keys with practiced efficiency. What he found made his blood run cold. "Sir," Morrison said, his voice tight with something between awe and disbelief, "Reaper 77 was assigned to Captain Valentina Tank Kozlov. But, sir, Captain Kozlov was shot down 48 hours ago during the initial assault. She's listed as KIA." The command center fell silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant rumble of thunder. On the tactical display, the lone blip continued its steady approach toward Grid Square Tango 74, where 3 companies of Marines waited for a miracle that shouldn't be possible. Whitfield closed his eyes for a moment, feeling every one of his 58 years pressing down on his shoulders like stones. When he opened them again, his gaze was fixed on that single green dot moving across the screen with the determination of someone who had already made peace with whatever came next. "Tank," he whispered to himself, "what the hell are you doing up there?" Captain Valentina Kozlov, Coulson Tank, had earned her nickname not through any similarity to armored vehicles, but for her reputation of taking punishment that would break other pilots and continuing to fly. She was small in stature, barely meeting the height requirements for military aviation, with dark hair usually pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes the color of winter storms. But in the cockpit of an A-10, she became something else entirely. Born to Ukrainian immigrants in a small Ohio town, she had grown up hearing stories of her grandfather's resistance against impossible odds during World War II. Those stories had shaped her, molded her into someone who saw surrender as a concept that applied to other people. She had joined the Air Force not for glory or adventure, but because she had looked at the world and decided that someone needed to stand between the darkness and the light. Her squadron mates had initially treated her with the casual dismissiveness that often greeted female pilots in the tight-knit brotherhood of attack aviation. She was too small, too quiet, too serious. She didn't drink with them at the officers' club, didn't trade war stories or dirty jokes. She spent her off-duty hours studying tactical manuals and maintenance procedures, learning every bolt and wire of her aircraft with the devotion of a scholar studying sacred texts. The first time they saw her in action changed everything. It was during a training exercise in Nevada, a complex scenario involving close air support for ground troops under simulated attack. Other pilots had struggled with the tight coordination required, the split-second decisions that separated precision strikes from friendly fire incidents. Tank had moved through the exercise like a surgeon with wings, placing her ordnance with devastating accuracy while maintaining constant communication with ground controllers. After that, the jokes stopped. The dismissive comments faded. She wasn't Tank because she was built like a tank. She was Tank because when she locked onto a target, nothing could stop her from getting there. Now, according to all official records, Tank was dead. Her A-10, tail number 780684, had been shot down 2 days earlier during a close air support mission gone wrong. Search and rescue teams had found wreckage scattered across a mountainside, evidence of a catastrophic hit from a surface-to-air missile. No chute had been spotted, no survival beacon detected. The paperwork had been filed, next of kin notified, and her bunk in the squadron quarters had been stripped and prepared for the next pilot. But the voice on the radio was unmistakably hers, and the aircraft showing on radar was flying with her characteristic precision and calm determination. "Meridian Base, this is Reaper 77, Tank's voice came through the speakers again, steady as bedrock despite the storm she was flying through. "I have eyes on friendly positions. Request permission to engage targets of opportunity." General Whitfield found himself in a position no commander should face, being asked to authorize a ghost to enter combat. Every protocol screamed against it. Every regulation demanded he order the aircraft to return to base immediately for identification and debriefing. But 3 companies of Marines were dying in Grid Square Tango 74, and sometimes protocol had to give way to necessity. "Reaper 77, you are not showing on any flight manifest. Explain your status and current aircraft condition. The response came back with a hint of dry humor that those who knew Tank would have recognized immediately. Meridian Base, my status is airborne and my aircraft condition is ready to deliver ordnance. Request immediate clearance for close air support mission. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, monitoring communications from multiple frequencies, suddenly straightened in his chair. His face had gone pale as he listened to chatter coming through his headphones. Sir, I'm monitoring marine frequency. Call sign Anvil 6 is reporting they can hear an A-10 inbound. They're requesting immediate air support. Enemy forces are massing for what looks like a final assault. The tactical display showed red symbols converging on the Marines' position like wolves closing in for a kill. Time was running out, measured now in minutes rather than hours. Whatever decision General Whitfield made, it had to be made now. He looked around the command center at the faces of his staff, young officers and enlisted personnel who had trained their entire careers for moments like this, but had never imagined facing a situation where the dead returned to fight. In their eyes, he saw a mixture of hope and disbelief, the human need to believe in miracles warring with military pragmatism. The radio crackled again. This time, it wasn't Tank's voice but that of a Marine ground controller, his transmission broken by static and the sound of incoming fire. Any station, this is Anvil 6. We are in contact and taking heavy casualties. We have wounded who need immediate evacuation and cannot break contact. If there's anyone out there, we need help now. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Whitfield reached for the radio handset, knowing that his next words would either authorize a miracle or send a ghost to join the Marines in whatever fate awaited them in Grid Square Tango 74. Tank's A-10 emerged from the storm clouds like a gray angel of death, her twin General Electric TF-34 engines leaving contrails in the thin mountain air. The Thunderbolt II, known affectionately as the Warthog to those who flew and maintained it, was not a beautiful aircraft by conventional standards. It was built around the massive GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon that formed its spine, an airplane designed around a gun rather than the other way around. Its titanium bathtub cockpit could withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft fire, and its redundant flight systems meant it could continue flying even with catastrophic damage. In Tank's hands, it became an instrument of surgical precision. She banked left, beginning her attack run at an altitude that would have made other pilots nervous. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with wind shears that could tear control surfaces off less robust aircraft. Lightning flickered through the clouds around her, and turbulence jarred her against her restraint harness with each gust. But Tank had flown in worse conditions, had learned to read the sky like a book written in wind and storm. Below, the Marines of Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Regiment were fighting for their lives in a rocky valley that offered little cover and no easy extraction routes. They had been conducting a reconnaissance mission when they stumbled into what intelligence later determined was a major enemy staging area. What should have been a routine patrol had become a desperate last stand. Captain Jake Morrison, no relation to the intelligence analyst back at Meridian Base, pressed himself against a boulder as automatic weapons fire sparked off the rocks around his position. His radio operator, Lance Corporal Davis, lay wounded beside him, still clutching the handset despite a through-and-through bullet wound in his shoulder. Anvil 6, this is Reaper 77, Tank's voice came through with crystal clarity. I have visual on your position. Mark your forward line of troops with smoke. Morrison grabbed the handset with hands that shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. Reaper 77, Anvil 6. We've got approximately 200 enemy personnel in prepared positions to our north and east. They've got us pinned down in a kill zone with interlocking fields of fire. We have 14 wounded and are low on ammunition. Copy, Anvil 6. I'm going to make some noise to the north. Keep your heads down. Above them, Tank rolled into her attack run with the smooth precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times in training and dozens of times in combat. She had memorized every control surface, every instrument, every characteristic of her aircraft until flying it was as natural as breathing. The GAU-8 cannon pointed where she looked, and she looked where the enemy was gathering for their final assault. The sound of the A-10's cannon was unlike anything else in modern warfare. The GAU-8 fired depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 3,900 rounds per minute, creating a sound that was part buzzsaw, part thunder, part earthquake. To friendly forces, it was the sound of salvation. To enemy forces, it was the last thing many of them would ever hear. Tank's first pass lasted exactly 4 seconds, but those 4 seconds changed everything. 65-30 rounds impacted the enemy position with devastating precision, each round capable of penetrating armored vehicles and fortified positions. The concentrated fire shattered the enemy's northern flank, sending survivors scrambling for cover that no longer existed. "Holy shit," Morrison breathed into his radio. "Reaper 7-7, that was danger close and right on target. We've got enemy forces breaking contact on the north side." "Copy, Anvil 6. I'm coming around for another pass. This time I'll work the eastern approach." But even as Tank banked for her second attack run, new threats were emerging. Enemy surface-to-air missiles were activating, their radar signatures painting her aircraft as targeting systems came online. Shoulder-fired missiles began reaching up toward her from multiple positions, leaving smoke trails against the gray sky like the fingers of death itself. Tank's training took over. She deployed flares and chaff while simultaneously adjusting her flight path to avoid the predictable firing solutions the missiles were designed to exploit. The A-10's robust construction and redundant systems gave her options that pilots of more delicate aircraft didn't have, but even the Warthog had its limits. A proximity-fused missile detonated 50 feet off her starboard wing, sending shrapnel through her right engine and puncturing multiple fuel lines. Warning lights illuminated her instrument panel like a Christmas tree, and the acrid smell of burning hydraulic fluid began to fill the cockpit. "Meridian Base, this is Reaper 7-7, she reported with the same calm professionalism she might use to order coffee. "I've taken damage to my right engine and I'm showing multiple system failures, continuing the mission." In the command center, General Whitfield gripped the radio handset so tightly his knuckles cracked. "Reaper 7-7, say your fuel state and aircraft condition." "I have sufficient fuel for mission completion, and my aircraft is flyable. Anvil 6 still needs close air support." What Tank didn't report was that her right engine was winding down, that she was losing hydraulic pressure in 2 of her 3 systems, and that her airspeed indicator had been destroyed by shrapnel. What she also didn't mention was that she was flying with injuries of her own. A piece of metal from the missile detonation had found its way through a gap in her armored cockpit and opened a gash across her left temple that was bleeding steadily into her helmet. None of that mattered. Below her, Marines were dying, and she had ordnance left to deliver. Tank's second attack run was a thing of beauty and terror. Despite her damaged aircraft and deteriorating weather conditions, she placed her rounds with surgical precision along the enemy's eastern flank. This time, she used a combination of cannon fire and Maverick missiles, the latter guided by her targeting pod to destroy 2 machine gun positions that had been causing the Marines the most trouble. The effect was immediate and decisive. Enemy fire slackened noticeably, and Morrison's Marines began to gain fire superiority for the first time in 18 hours. "Reaper 7-7, Anvil 6, Morrison called. "Enemy forces are withdrawing from prepared positions. We can see them moving north through the valley. Can you pursue?" Tank checked her remaining ordnance. She had perhaps 30 seconds of cannon ammunition left and 1 Maverick missile. Her fuel was dropping faster than it should due to the punctured lines, and her right engine was producing barely half its rated thrust. By every logical measure, she should be heading home. Instead, she banked left and began her pursuit of the retreating enemy forces. Anvil 6, Reaper 7-7. I have visual on approximately 50 enemy personnel moving north through the valley in 2 groups. I'm going to see if I can convince them to keep moving. What followed was a master class in low-altitude flying and tactical air support. Tank followed the valley north, using terrain features to mask her approach while maintaining visual contact with both the fleeing enemy forces and the Marines below. She flew so low that her wingtips nearly brushed the canyon walls, using the A-10's exceptional maneuverability to navigate terrain that should have been impossible for a fixed-wing aircraft. Her final cannon pass was a work of art. Flying at less than 500 feet above ground level, she followed the valley floor while enemy forces scattered in all directions. Her remaining ammunition was expended in 2 short bursts that bracketed the retreating forces without causing unnecessary casualties, a demonstration of power rather than a massacre. The silence that followed was deafening. Anvil 6, this is Reaper 7-7, Tank called. I'm Winchester on ammunition and need to RTB. What's your status? Morrison looked around at his Marines, seeing expressions of amazement and relief that he shared completely. In the space of 10 minutes, an impossible pilot in an aircraft that shouldn't exist had turned their desperate last stand into a victory. Reaper 7-7, Anvil 6. We are secure and ready for casualty evacuation. Enemy forces have withdrawn from the immediate area. I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you just saved 37 Marines. Tank's response was barely audible, her voice finally showing the strain of flying a damaged aircraft through impossible conditions. Just doing my job, Anvil 6. Help is on the way. As she banked toward home, smoke trailing from her damaged engine, Tank allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mathematics had worked out after all. Marines were alive who would have been dead. Sometimes that was all that mattered. But her troubles were just beginning. The storm that had provided cover for her approach was intensifying, and her damaged aircraft was becoming increasingly difficult to control. The flight home would test every skill she had learned in 10 years of flying, every lesson taught by instructors who had emphasized that bringing the aircraft home was just as important as completing the mission. General Whitfield watched the green dot representing Reaper 7-7 make its slow way back toward Meridian Base, its progress erratic as the pilot fought both weather and mechanical failure. Around him, his staff worked with quiet efficiency to coordinate the rescue helicopters that would extract Morrison's Marines, now that Tank had cleared the immediate threats from their position. "Sir," Captain Morrison at the intelligence station called out, "I've been reviewing the aircraft serial number that Reaper 7-7 is squawking. It's definitely 7080684, assigned to Captain Kozlov. But, sir, we have wreckage photos from the crash site. That aircraft was destroyed." Whitfield studied the images on Morrison's screen. Twisted metal scattered across a mountainside, evidence of catastrophic structural failure. By every measure of physics and common sense, the aircraft Tank was flying should be nothing more than scrap metal and smoke. "Maybe we were wrong about the crash," Whitfield said quietly. "Maybe she managed to get out, found another aircraft." "Sir, there are no other A-10s unaccounted for. Every airframe in the theater is tagged and tracked. According to the maintenance logs, there is no A-10 Thunderbolt II that could be flying under that call sign, except for the one that was shot down 48 hours ago." The implications hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Either their records were catastrophically wrong, or something impossible was happening in the skies above them. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez suddenly straightened at his communications console. "Sir, I'm getting a transmission from Reaper 7-7. She's declaring an emergency." Tank's voice came through the speakers, tight with concentration but still professionally calm. "Meridian Base, This is Reaper 77 declaring emergency. I have lost my right engine completely, and I'm showing red lights on hydraulic systems 2 and 3. Request priority handling for landing. Reaper 77, Meridian Base. Copy your emergency. Runway 27 is being cleared for your approach. Current winds are variable at 15 gusting to 30. Say your fuel state. Meridian Base, fuel state is approximately 10 minutes remaining. I'll take the first approach I can get. In the dim glow of her cockpit lights, Tank fought to keep her aircraft level as wind gusts tried to flip her inverted. The A-10 was famous for its ability to fly with massive damage, but she was pushing those capabilities to their absolute limit. Her left engine was carrying the full load, producing enough thrust to keep her airborne but not enough for a normal approach. She would get one chance at landing, and if she missed, there wouldn't be fuel for a second attempt. The mountains around Meridian Base were invisible in the storm, hidden by clouds and rain that reduced visibility to mere yards. Tank flew by instruments alone, trusting her training and her aircraft's robust navigation systems to guide her home. Lightning continued to flicker around her, close enough that she could feel the static electricity raising the hair on her arms. Meridian Base, I have the field in sight, she reported as the runway lights emerged from the darkness ahead. The parallel lines of white light looked like a pathway to salvation, but Tank knew that getting there safely would require everything she had learned about flying. She configured the aircraft for landing, lowering her landing gear and extending her flaps despite warning lights that indicated multiple system failures. The A-10 responded sluggishly, its damaged flight controls requiring constant attention to maintain proper approach attitude. In the control tower, the air traffic controller watched Tank's approach with growing concern. Her airspeed was too high, her rate of descent too shallow. She was going to overshoot the runway unless she made immediate corrections. Reaper 77, you're high and fast. Recommend go-around. Tank's response was immediate. Negative Meridian Base. I'm committed to this approach. What happened next would be talked about in aviation circles for years to come. Tank performed a forward slip so aggressive that it defied conventional wisdom, dropping her aircraft's nose while simultaneously applying opposite rudder to increase her rate of descent without gaining excessive airspeed. The maneuver was dangerous under normal conditions and bordered on suicidal with a damaged aircraft, but it worked. The A-10 touched down hard on the center line of runway 27, its landing gear compressing nearly to their limits as Tank fought to maintain control during the rollout. Sparks flew from her right main gear, damaged during the missile detonation, and black smoke poured from both engines as she applied maximum braking. The aircraft came to a stop, barely 50 yards from the end of the runway. Emergency vehicles raced toward the stationary A-10, their red lights flashing in the pre-dawn darkness. Crash rescue crews prepared for the worst, expecting to find catastrophic damage and possibly a critically injured pilot. What they found instead was Captain Valentina, Tank, Kozlov climbing out of her cockpit under her own power, her flight suit torn and bloodied but her spirit unbroken. She stood on the wing of her aircraft for a moment, looking back at the damage that should have killed her twice over, then climbed down to meet the medical crew that was rushing toward her. "Ma'am, we need to get you to the medical center immediately," the senior medic said, nodding the blood on her face and the way she favored her left side. "I'm fine," Tank replied with characteristic directness, "but I need to debrief with intelligence immediately. There are things they need to know about enemy positions and capabilities." As she walked away from her aircraft, supported by medical personnel who weren't taking no for an answer, Tank didn't look back at the A-10 that had carried her through the impossible mission. She knew, with the certainty that comes from a decade of flying, that tail number 7080684 would never fly again. The aircraft had given everything it had to complete the mission, just as she had asked it to. In the command center, General Whitfield received the reports with a mixture of relief and profound confusion. Tank was alive and relatively uninjured. The Marines had been successfully extracted. The mission was complete, but the fundamental questions remained unanswered. "Sir," Captain Morrison approached with a thick folder of photographs and technical reports. "I've been reviewing everything we have on the aircraft Captain Kozlov was flying. Sir, there is no possible way that aircraft could have been airworthy. The damage patterns in the wreckage photos show complete structural failure. And sir, we found Captain Kozlov's dog tags in the wreckage." Whitfield looked at the photos spread across the table: twisted metal, scattered debris, evidence of a crash that no pilot could have survived. Yet Tank was currently in the medical center, submitting to examination while demanding to speak to intelligence officers about enemy dispositions. "What are you suggesting, Captain?" Morrison hesitated, clearly struggling with the implications of what he was about to say. "Sir, I'm not sure what I'm suggesting, but according to every piece of evidence we have, Captain Kozlov died 48 hours ago, and the aircraft she was flying tonight was destroyed in that crash." The general stared at the photographs for a long moment, then walked to the window that overlooked the flight line. In the distance, he could see Tank's A-10 surrounded by maintenance crews who were documenting damage that should have been impossible to survive. The aircraft looked like it had flown through hell itself, which in many ways it had. "Maybe," Whitfield said quietly, "there are some things that can't be explained by regulations and maintenance logs. Maybe sometimes, when good people are in trouble, the impossible becomes possible." He turned back to his staff, his expression grave but determined. "As far as official records are concerned, Captain Kozlov successfully completed a close air support mission that saved the lives of 37 Marines. The aircraft she was flying, tail number 7080684, was damaged beyond repair but completed its mission. Those are the facts that will go in the report." Captain Morrison nodded slowly, understanding that some truths were too large for paperwork to contain. In the medical center, Tank sat on an examination table while a Navy corpsman cleaned the wound on her temple. She stared straight ahead, her mind still processing everything that had happened since she had first heard the distress calls from Grid Square Tango 74. "Ma'am," the corpsman said gently, "can you tell me how you sustained these injuries? Some of this damage looks like it's been healing for days, not hours." Tank looked down at her hands, noting scars and cuts that she didn't remember receiving. Her flight suit was torn in places that didn't correspond to anything that had happened during tonight's mission. For the first time since climbing into the cockpit, she allowed herself to wonder exactly what had transpired in the past 48 hours. "I'm not sure," she said finally. "I remember taking off on a routine mission 2 days ago. The next thing I clearly remember is hearing Marines calling for help and realizing I was the only one in position to assist." The corpsman made notes on his chart, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with the explanation. Like everyone else involved in the night's events, he was dealing with facts that didn't quite fit together into a coherent narrative. "Ma'am, do you remember being shot down? Do you remember ejecting or crash landing?" Tank closed her eyes, trying to access memories that felt strangely distant and unclear. She remembered the mission briefing, remembered taxiing out for takeoff, remembered the familiar ritual of pre-flight checks and radio calls. After that, everything became fragmented: images of mountains and smoke, the sound of missiles exploding, the sensation of her aircraft being hit by something massive and destructive. But she also remembered climbing into the cockpit tonight, remembered the familiar weight of her helmet and the comfortable embrace of the ejection seat. She remembered every detail of the flight to Grid Square Tango 74, every radio call and every attack run. Those memories were crystal clear, while everything that should have happened between the two events remained frustratingly vague. "I remember pieces," she said, "but not everything. Maybe it will come back to me later." The The corpsman finished his examination and stepped back. "Ma'am, physically you're in remarkably good condition considering what you've been through. I'd like to keep you here for observation for a few hours, just to make sure there are no complications from the head injury." Tank nodded absently, her mind already turning to the after-action reports that would need to be filed, the intelligence briefings that would extract every useful detail from the night's mission. She had work to do, Marines to account for, and a squadron that needed to know their wingman had returned from whatever distant place she had been. Outside the medical center, the storm was finally beginning to break up. Dawn was creeping across the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold that Tank had never thought she would see again. Somewhere in Grid Square Tango 74, 37 Marines were preparing for extraction, alive because someone had refused to accept that hope was gone. In the maintenance hangar, Chief Master Sergeant Patricia Williams stood beside Tank's A-10, studying damage that defied easy explanation. Williams had 30 years of experience maintaining the Thunderbolt II, had seen these aircraft return from missions with damage that would have destroyed other airframes. But what she was looking at now pushed the boundaries of what she thought possible. "Chief, what's your assessment?" asked Major David Park, the squadron maintenance officer. Williams ran her hand along a section of wing where multiple missile fragments had punctured the aluminum skin. "Sir, this aircraft should not have been able to fly. The damage to the right engine is catastrophic, complete compressor failure, multiple turbine blades missing, fuel lines severed in at least 6 places. The hydraulic system damage alone should have made control impossible." She moved to the cockpit, pointing to holes in the armored tub that surrounded the pilot's seat. "These penetrations are from high-velocity fragments. Some of them came within inches of the pilot's head. And sir, look at this." Williams indicated scorch marks around the cockpit that suggested exposure to intense heat, the kind of thermal damage that occurred during fires or explosions. But the pattern was wrong. Instead of radiating outward from a source, the marks seemed to cover the entire aircraft uniformly. "It looks like this bird flew through fire," Williams said quietly. "Not just engine fire, but something much bigger and hotter. I've never seen thermal damage like this on an aircraft that was still flyable." Major Park walked around the aircraft, noting details that would need to be documented in the maintenance records. Every battle damage repair told a story, and this A-10 story was unlike anything in his experience. "Chief, I need you to prepare this aircraft for detailed examination. Document everything, every piece of damage, every system failure, every anomaly you can find. And Chief, keep this between us until we understand what we're dealing with." Williams nodded, understanding the implications. In the close-knit world of military aviation, unusual incidents had a way of becoming legends, and legends had a way of growing beyond the facts that spawned them. Whatever had really happened to Tank and her aircraft, it needed to be understood before it became the subject of speculation and rumor. As the sun rose higher, painting the flight line in warm golden light, the maintenance crew began their methodical examination of the impossible aircraft. Each measurement, each photograph, each technical note would become part of a record that would puzzle investigators for years to come. In the squadron-ready room, Tank's fellow pilots gathered around the duty officer's desk, listening to the radio traffic recordings from the night's mission. The voice coming through the speakers was unmistakably Tank's, but the mission she was describing had officially never taken place. Captain Michael "Hawk" Harrison, Tank's flight lead and closest friend in the squadron, listened with growing amazement to the tactical radio calls that chronicled the rescue of Anvil Company. Her calm professionalism under fire, her precise target descriptions, her tactical decision-making, all of it was vintage Tank, the pilot they thought they had lost 2 days earlier. "Jesus," whispered Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the newest pilot in the squadron. She was flying with basically no hydraulics and half her engine destroyed. How did she maintain control? Major Jennifer Rodriguez, the squadron operations officer, looked up from the technical reports scattered across her desk. According to the maintenance assessment, she shouldn't have been able to. The flight control damage alone should have made precision flying impossible. Yet listen to these radio calls. She was making textbook attack runs with ordnance placement that I couldn't improve on. Hawk stood and walked to the window that overlooked the flight line, where Tank's A-10 sat surrounded by investigators and technicians. He had flown wing-to-wing with Tank for 3 years, had trusted her judgment in combat situations that would have broken other pilots. But even he was struggling to understand how she had accomplished what the radio logs described. "Maybe," he said slowly, "we've been underestimating what Tank was capable of. Maybe we never really knew how good she was." It was a thought that would prove prescient in the days to come. Tank spent the next several hours in debriefings that grew increasingly surreal as intelligence officers tried to reconcile her first-hand accounts with official records that insisted she had been dead for 2 days. She described enemy positions with pinpoint accuracy, provided tactical assessments that proved invaluable for future operations, and answered technical questions about her aircraft's performance with the detailed knowledge of someone who had pushed the A-10 to its absolute limits. But when asked about the 48 hours between her supposed shoot-down and last night's mission, her memory remained frustratingly blank. "Captain Kozlov," said Colonel Sarah Martinez, the wing intelligence officer, "help me understand the timeline. According to our records, you took off on a routine close air support mission 72 hours ago. Search and rescue teams found wreckage of your aircraft and evidence of catastrophic failure. Yet last night, you appear in the same aircraft, flying a mission that saved 37 Marines.